Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen's hearing for the town of Hingham, Thursday, June 27th. Our agenda this evening, which is a revision from what was published a few days ago, we have a call to order with minutes to be approved for June 13th. There is an item on the agenda for Back River Townhomes. There's a development that late this afternoon which would require discussion with my peers, so we will not discuss that issue this evening. And then we have a discussion, the town engineer, Roger Fernandez, on the Hingham Head House Stabilization Project. And then the bulk of the meeting will serve to focus on the recommendation and recent report from the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee with their recommendations. So with that, let me bring up for a discussion the minutes of June 13th.
I'm fine.
You're fine? Okay, there was one correction.
Sure, I made just a couple of Scrivener type, namely the spelling of my name. But other than that, I'm fine.
Let me look, is ours right? Ours are okay.
I don't know, let's double check.
Thanks.
Gee,
Okay.
Paul's pretty easy to spell.
With that,
Touche.
good point. All right, with that minor change, and we'll put that in the motion, if somebody would make a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
As amended.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. As I said, item number 2 on the Back River Homes will be discussed at a future date, and therefore, I'd like to invite Roger Fernandez to come up and talk to us about the Hingham Head House Stabilization Project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come before the board seeking its approval to enter into contract with MCI Contracting, Inc., located on Washington Street in Stoughton, Massachusetts. The intent of the contract is to stabilize the head house, also known as the barn, also known as the cordage factory, located directly out back behind Town Hall. The intent of the project would be, again, to stabilize the building so that it does not fall into further disrepair. The contract value, based on the low bid, it would be $199,700. We did receive 2 other bids. Those are included in the memo you should have before you. Those other bids were from Varica Construction. They bid $242,000 even. Tree Line Construction bid $234,130. And the engineering estimate, our engineering estimate was $210,000. The intent would be to enter into contract for the full amount. The bid was structured such that it included an ad alternate, so that the base bid was $161,000, and the ad alternate was $38,700. The ad alternate intended to encompass the work around repair of the windows themselves. The structure itself, the intent for the stabilization is to repurpose the building at some point in the future. What that's going to be, has not been determined yet. The project is being funded via the CPC funds, and the building itself is considered historical, although it's not on the register, and it's gone through all its requisite reviews by all those different committees and people who might have an interest in the project. To that end, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Is it used for anything now?
Yeah, the Recreation Department currently stores some of their seasonal things, recreational stuff, I guess, in the building itself, yeah.
So might it be highly likely that they would make use of it in the future?
I think that there is an intent to come before you at some point
Okay.
and ask for some sort of
Good.
repurposing.
In one of the CPC projects, if I may interrupt, there was a discussion about the use of this facility. So when it was first brought before us at
Right.
the CPC. So I think there was an intent, and I think it was more than just maintenance, which was one of the issues, but also storage of some of the sports equipment,
Oh, good.
as I understand it.
Yep, I think that sounds correct.
Mr. Hingham?
Hi, Roger. Is there going to be any work done with respect to Playground Road in association with this project?
No, sir, no.
How will the vehicles that work on the project enter it through the fire department driveway?
Yep, I think we're going to try to make sure that they enter that way, correct. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
No? Okay. Mr. Alexiadis, any comments? Boy,
Okay.
why can't everything be like this? Any questions from the public? Okay.
All right.
I'll enter a motion.
All right, a motion to enter into contract with MCI Contracting Incorporated, 1296 Washington Street, Stoughton, for the $161,000 base bid, plus the add alternate work totaling $38,700, for a grand total of $199,700.
I second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Love being ahead of the schedule. Let's see if we can keep it that way. Roger,
Sir?
you may.
And dismissed?
No, right? Oh,
Thank you.
who's doing the landfill? Are you doing the landfill?
Take care of that.
Okay.
Okay. You want to do that now, Ted?
If you'd like.
Sure, we have a few minutes. We're ahead of schedule.
Sure, it's a intra-department transfer request for the landfill. We received bids on trailers through the capital outlay approval process, and the bids came in shy by about $9,000. Randy has identified a funding source within his own budget in the landfill department. The trailers were capital outlay for the landfill. We don't really go back to capital on this because it's not, we're not asking to spend additional money on capital. We're just funding the project they approved.
Okay, any questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion. Paul? if you would.
Sure. I'll recommend move to recommend approval of landfill intra-department transfer request dated June 18, 2013, in the amount of $9,000 from landfill expenses to landfill capital.
Second.
All those, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Let me give it a couple more minutes because there may be some people who are coming at this public scheduled time. We have one other vote on the Joe Freeman. Ted, can you?
Sure. You need, in this vote, what is being asked of the board is to acknowledge that Joseph Freeman has a disclosure file and a conflict, and you are determining whether or not that conflict is material enough to allow him to sit on the zoning board application for Derby Street Shops. And in the past, this has occurred with other board members when they have conflicts that may not be direct, but deemed appropriate for you to review.
Do you know the nature of the conflict? Is it
His firm does work with the developer for Derby Street Shops in other locations other than Hingham. So they have other locations around the state and the country, and his firm does represent them.
But the Hingham, doing something in Hingham would not directly
Correct.
impact him? Okay. So it's just an,
And you need to opine as to whether or not you feel it would. If you feel it wouldn't, then, that's obviously the nature of the vote, to allow him to continue to serve. Obviously, Joe is a valuable member of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
yes, okay. Any questions from anyone?
I'm just reading this, sorry, for the first time.
No, that's okay.
What does Joe do is he a lawyer?
Yes.
Yes.
And
No,
this
no,
is,
No, he's not.
Is he an engineer?
He's an engineer.
I apologize. I thought he was an
Joe
attorney.
Fisher.
Joe Fisher.
No, I thought Joe Friedman was too, but
has
I
he,
know he doesn't work in this aspect of his firm's business in any way.
has he opined on Derby Street matters before?
I cannot give you that answer.
I'm not sure he was on that back then.
He wouldn't
Susan
have
might
been.
know.
He wouldn't have been back then.
I recognize Susan Murphy, special counsel to the town.
I'm familiar with this disclosure statement being filed. It is only recently that his company has begun representing SR Weiner and their various entities. So that's why when it came up for the current application, Joe brought it to the attention of his fellow board members. John Coughlin has opined on it and also spoke to the Ethics Commission about it. And the determination was because his company, he's not directly related in any SR Weiner work, and his company does not do any work on derby shops, that the filing of the disclosure would meet the statutory requirement under the ethics law.
Okay.
And so that's how this came about.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
I'm fine.
You're fine?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I've worked with Joe on various votes, and I'm satisfied that his representation, that he can be objective, is all we need on that
Well,
one.
that is my experience as well when I worked with him. Too many years ago, it seems, anyway. Okay, Mr. Healy, would you make a motion, please?
Sure, I just gotta find it. Okay, I'll move to determine that the interest of Joseph Freeman in the application for modification of the mixed-use special permit for Derby Street shops is not so substantial as to be deemed likely to affect the integrity of the services which the town may expect from him, and to allow him to participate in the Zoning Board of Appeals consideration of this application.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Actually, if you want to do one more, I'd ask that you might do the last one
Last one.
on the vote. Given that the subject of the vote
Oh.
started occurring about 45 minutes ago.
Shall I do,
that?
I'll do an
Yeah,
easy
go
one.
on. Yeah, would you, Irma, please? Thank you.
And then we'll just adjourn down
I
there.
want to thank Mr. Clark for raising his hand. Thank you.
I make a motion to approve the temporary entertainment license request from Lincoln Maritime Center for the Kickoff to Summer event on Barnes Wharf from 6:30 PM to 8 PM on Thursday, June 27th, 2013.
Okay, so for the record, I'll show it's Chicago here for the moment. Do I have a second on that?
I did second it.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay. The next item is the bigger item of the agenda and has to do with the study that was performed by the Aquarian, or the Water Acquisition Study Committee. And the way I think the discussion will go initially for the evening is I have some opening comments. I'll invite John Asher and Ed Siegfried to join the table. And I am reminded that I blew an issue. Thank you, Andrea. I'll table this for a moment. That's my right, I think. Something happened yesterday that did not make the agenda item, and I'd like to just insert that at this moment. Andrea Young called me to get me up to speed on the repair and renovation of the town deed that used to sit in the selectman's office, unsecured, in plain glass, and we all thought it was a replica or some such thing left from many years ago. And what we discovered was that, no, in fact, this is the original deed, signed in this, with the signature affixed of Charles I, who caused me to revisit when I was thinking of who he was. He lost his head 14 years after Hingham was founded. Now, I don't know if that's a precursor or not, but he did sign this before that event happened. So Tom Wilson and Andrea Young are here to give us a copy of the original version that has been submitted for replacement and renovation. So if I could invite you both up. Thank you, Tom.
And while they're coming, this also hung in the old town hall, which was less secure than the current town hall, and we all thought it was a copy. No one had any idea that it was real.
Just very, very briefly, thank you very much.
I apologize.
No, we're very excited to be here and to be able to bring this back to town. I'm just going to update you on where the real deed is and what's happening with it. And then Tom Wilson, the Historical Commission Chairman, will say a few words. Today I went to Andover to the Northeast Document Conservation Center, which is the entity that is working on the original town deed. And given that it was going to take a little bit of time to do the repairs necessary and to conserve it properly, we thought we would have a digital replica prepared. So actually we're going to have two. One is this one, which is a photograph, a digital copy of the one that was hanging in the selectman's office for so many years. And then after the restoration work is complete, there will be another framed copy that will hang so that people can see it. The original deed, however, will be also framed, and it will be available for research. But it will be, they're building a clamshell box for it. So it'll rest in there for however long. It'll very rarely see the light of day because, as we all know, that's what causes it to deteriorate. So that's about it. And so we expect probably in the next couple of months, the original and the digital of the restored deed will come back. So you'll have a before and after, essentially, to hang wherever you choose to do so.
Very good. Tom Wilson is the chair of the Historic Commission.
Just a little bit of information, a little bit of history about this deed. It was signed on July 4th, 1665. So it's 348 years old in about a week or so. It was signed by Sachem Josiah Wampatuck. You've heard that name before. He was the Sachem of the Massachusetts tribe. And the main body of the deed describes the land that's being transferred to the town of Hingham. Hard to read because it's in Old English legalese, but in essence, it's all of the land in Hingham and Cohasset. And it's transferred to Captain Joshua Hobart, who's the brother of Peter Hobart, who founded the town, and Ensign John Thaxter, acting on behalf of the town. And it says, and I'll quote, for valuable consideration to us, paid in hand. So they don't quote how much money they got for the towns of Hingham and Cohasset, but there's the history books in the 17th or 18th and 19th century. There's several of them that quote, I guess the wives' tale is that the town sold 12 acres of land on top of Turkey Hill, took that money that they got, which wasn't very much back in 1665, and gave it to the Chief Wampatuck as payment for the rest of the town and Cohasset. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's quoted in a lot of the history books, but that's the essence of what this is about. So it's a very valuable and unique document.
Thank you. Thank you both for the effort that you're doing to preserve it. But more than that, thank you for the work that you do. And I think it's very fitting this time of the year that we remember from whence we came. So congratulations. See, and can we have that?
We're going to leave it with you.
Sure. Ted has to stay up all night to watch it. So. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you both. And thank you for getting me back on track. So as I started to say, on the Water Acquisition Study Committee, I have some comments. Then John Asher and Ed, joined by Ed Siegfried, will put forth additional information that has been discussed over the last months, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, let me just give you a framework in which this occurred. So tonight, the Board of Selectmen will hear the recommendations of the Water Acquisition Study Committee. Since the passage of Article 19 at our April 2012 town meeting, this group has inquired, studied, debated, tested, and challenged a variety of data points, theories, recommendations, and opinions concerning the answer to one question: should the town of Hingham own the water distribution and treatment facilities that serve the citizens of our town? The study committee consisted of John Asher, Ed Siegfried, Joe Beerworth, Josh Krumholtz, all of whom served as chairman of the advisory committee and therefore have demonstrated a view of issues that should not have predetermined answers or conclusions. The chair of the Sewer Commission, Michael Solano, joined that group because of the important relationship between sewer and water and his understanding of the issues involved. The committee met officially many times and took a careful, detailed approach, and you'll hear about that. Individually, they each had specific areas to pursue and then to report back to the full committee. They did take their time. Most of the data they produced, either as a document or a study, appears on the town website for all to see. So let me at the outset thank them for their work to date. They have kept the website and the minutes current, and from time to time, as you may recall, I, as the selectman liaison to that committee, have used these meetings, such as tonight, as a way to reinforce the communication vehicle. Again, let me, on behalf of the entire board, thank the committee for their work. You will recall that we had this issue aired at a town forum, and this past April, we issued a written report at the town meeting. And I'd like to thank the press as well for enabling us to communicate and keeping updates present. After the town approved Article 19, Aquarian then stepped up and shared the information with the town that allowed us to digest their point of view, that not only proved educational to us, but mostly helpful. That sharing subsequently led to regular meetings with their representatives, and I would be remiss if I didn't particularly thank Aquarian's president, Chuck Verlot, and sitting in the front row, their vice president, John Walsh, for keeping the dialogue open and frequent. It became a business-like discussion from the start and has continued that way. As I talk to you tonight, you should know that Aquarian's board has been discussing the issue of Hingham as recently as today, and we hopefully will find the results of their deliberations shortly. You will recall that this study started with a focus on high rates and poor service. That's what drove the decisive decision at town meeting. Since that town meeting, the town and Aquarian have worked to improve service and their relationship with Hingham citizens on water matters. I was hoping we had seen the last of their colored postcards until last week when, like many of you, I got a postcard. The good news was it was to invite us all to review some issues surrounding the Ware River, which are of mutual concern to so many of us. So no matter what happens here tonight, beginning tonight and here forward, I would just suggest that we all be prepared for communications from Aquarian. And to prove that point, I'll share with you a story. When I got home last night from an interview session we had with the selectmen, my peers, to discuss with the volunteers, my good wife, who was here this evening, informed me we were recipients of a survey phone call from all people, Aquarian. Today, when I woke up, other citizens called me to tell me they too had received survey phone calls. The way the call went, according to our experience, if you answered question 1 with a favorable view of Aquarian, You then got to be asked questions 2 and 3, which encouraged you, by the way, in question 3 to come to the meeting here tonight. If you did not answer question 1 with a favorable review, the call ended. Then the thought crossed my mind, who's paying for this survey? And how is that cost going to appear to the ratepayer? That then reminded me of another recent experience with those of us who have been closer to the issue, and that has to do with the town of Oxford, also in Massachusetts. And as you may know, that is in court, and they're discussing somewhat the same issues that we have been looking at. But one of the fallouts from that discussion is that in the last rate decision, the ratepayers of Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset are paying half the cost of that legal dispute in Oxford. Aquarian did reduce the water rates by 8.2% by refinancing the bonds on the water treatment plant, and we're grateful for that. But we did ask them in those subsequent discussions, would they commit to reduced further rate increases? They could not, and would only agree that to delay any future increases by a year. Let's be frank, we still pay a lot for water. And while they have, to their credit, increased the capital allocations for improvements to the system, that step only addresses our existing needs, not our future ones. You will hear this is a business decision for us and for Aquarian. Are we better off if we own it, or if Macquarie, the owner of Aquarian, owns it? They are a successful Australian company, but rest assured, we contribute to that success. I've asked the study committee to report their answer to that question this evening, so I would invite John Asher, the chairman of the committee, and Ed Siegfried to come up and join us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the full Water Company Acquisition Study Committee, Ed Siegfried and I appreciate the opportunity to update the Board of Selectmen, and particularly the public, regarding recent developments since the committee's report to annual town meeting this past April. The study was authorized by annual town meeting 2012 to investigate the feasibility and advisability of acquisition by the town of the water company. The study has been conducted in 3 phases: financial legal analysis, where the committee has spent most of its time and energy during the past 13 months, of which Ed has been the leader, engineering issues, and governance considerations. Throughout the study, the committee has worked hard to keep the public as well informed and up to date as possible. We established a committee web page that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, on the town website, containing not just our meeting minutes, but also hundreds of pages of the documents that the committee has examined during its analysis. We've provided progress updates on our financial analysis both last summer and last fall. In February, we updated the advisory committee and presented at this year's annual town forum. And for this year's town meeting, we delivered a detailed multi-page report available both to town meeting attendees as well as to citizens who access the committee's webpage. Finally, by my count, there have been at least 15 newspaper articles in the Hingham Journal, Patriot Ledger, and Boston Globe over the past year summarizing committee study progress. So what has the progress been that the committee has made? Let me address that by phase. In the financial legal analysis, the committee has analyzed in detail Aquarian's operating and maintenance costs and the impact of town ownership on those costs. The committee has also examined Aquarian's derivation of acquisition prices presented to the town on July 11th of last year in accordance with Aquarion's interpretation of the 1879 statute pricing formula. Aquarion's options 1 through 3 ranged from $145 million to $194 million for the town to acquire all of the water company's property, plant, and equipment. In performing the financial analysis, the committee has utilized volunteers in addition to paid industry and legal experts in order to expend as little of the town-authorized funding as possible. The committee agreed that for it to make a recommendation to the board to proceed with acquisition of the water company, the results of the financial legal analysis would have to satisfy 3 criteria. Rates under town ownership would not increase solely as a result of the acquisition. That is, acquisition by the town would be rate transparent. Second, lower town ownership costs for operations and maintenance as well as debt service would enable lower and slower future rate increases, as well as a period of system upgrade expenditures greater than Aquarion's recent capital budgets of $1.4 million per year. Third, the town's interpretation of the 1879 statute pricing formula is supported by law and would be defensible if challenged in court. The results of the committee's financial legal analysis to date satisfy all 3 criteria. The committee estimates that under town ownership and taking advantage of the town's lower borrowing costs, total town expenses would be from $1 million to $1.5 million less per year than Aquarion's. After full repayment of the bonds used to acquire the water company, total town expenses would be more than $8 million less per year than Aquarion's. Regarding engineering, we've seen no showstoppers yet. The committee has agreed that were the town to acquire the water company, contractual outsourcing of operations and maintenance to a reputable vendor would be the recommended course of action. Consequently, a committee member with the town administrator have met twice with a representative vendor. In fact, the firm which outsources the Cohasset Water Department and has the advantage of some familiarity with the town's water company operation. While any decision to proceed with a particular outsourcer would necessarily have to conform to state procurement guidelines, the Woodard and Curran's rough estimates of what it would take to operate and maintain the water company fit within the projections of town ownership that Ed derived in terms of town costs versus Aquarion's. In summary, the committee believes that outsourcing water company operations and maintenance is a viable and cost-effective solution. Regarding the current state of the water company's capital infrastructure, the Tata and Howard 2007 and 2011 reports provide a fairly comprehensive summary of critical service areas and a phased approach to prioritized improvements. Acknowledging that the cost of capital improvements will be passed to ratepayers regardless of who owns the water company, the real issue is whether improvement of the aging system's infrastructure can be accelerated beyond Aquarion's recent performance. The financial legal analysis summarized previously suggests that such acceleration of infrastructure upgrade can be accomplished with less impact on rates than under Aquarion's ownership, in spite of the town's obligation to pay prevailing wage for labor. With respect to governance, also, no showstoppers yet identified. A committee member, and again with the town administrator, have met twice with the town managers of Hull and Cohasset, who are supportive of the study and its objectives. We've discussed, subject to the discussions and approvals with their respective town boards, both town managers are amenable to developing an intermunicipal agreement among the 3 towns that would address, among other things, apportionment of acquisition as well as operations and maintenance costs, a common water rate, and a town-specific capital surcharge, which would allow the respective towns the freedom to proceed at their own pace in terms of infrastructure upgrade or substantial new development. One of the town's state representatives and our state senator have also been apprised of current status and do not foresee any current impediments to a possible town acquisition. There is more work to be done regarding water company governance and regulatory considerations, but there appears to be sufficient agreement in principle to warrant proceeding further. Lastly, with respect to environmental and conservation concerns that were raised at this year's town forum, last week's Weir River Environmental Forum provided an excellent venue for education regarding watershed management. However, most of the issues discussed seem to be more within the purview of the town's various environmental and conservation boards and committees, including the town's Water Supply Committee, than influencing this committee's studies and deliberations. So in summary, the committee has evaluated the financial and legal risks versus rewards of proceeding with acquisition of the water company and concluded that the rewards outweigh the risks. There are no known showstoppers regarding engineering issues, governance concerns, or environmental and conservation concerns. Through month-end May of this year, the committee has expended approximately $120,000 of the $320,000 authorized by town meeting. About $200,000 of authorized funding remains. The town's option A, acquisition, and option C, negotiated settlement, are, in the opinion of the committee, still viable. Option B, to complete the study and recommend no further town action, is, in the committee's view, no longer appropriate. As a result of the committee's study to date and the results of its analysis, meetings, and discussions on the feasibility and advisability of acquisition, and acknowledging that there is still more work to do, the committee voted unanimously this past Tuesday evening to recommend that the Board of Selectmen take the steps necessary to begin a potential acquisition of the water company. Ed and I will be happy to entertain any questions that the board may have.
If I may, there were some questions that came up the other night, and I heard about them after the meeting was over, and then I've had, through the course of this deliberation, some other questions. So I thought, let's get those out so that people get some meat behind what the words you just heard John and I say. So what does, so you indulge me, I have about a dozen questions before I open it up to my colleagues. Why is town ownership of the water company better for town ratepayers?
I think that that really is what the committee focused on in terms of lower and slower rate increases, accelerated improvement of the capital infrastructure, and then a greater voice in the operation and environmental and conservation issues that might come before the water company.
Do we have a number on the savings that we project?
We do.
In the aggregate, if you carry the savings out through the year 2035, which is the year in which the water treatment plant lease expires, we've actually run the model out further than that. But through 2035, the savings range from a total of $70 million to close to $90 million. Or as a percentage, let's not use the word savings. I think that it's better to use the word difference, I think. That there's a difference in cost. Municipal ownership costs would be between 20 and 25% in total over that 22-year period, less than we're currently paying Aquarian and projected to be paying Aquarian. So it's 20 to 25%.
Good, thank you. This is a question for Ted, I think. Would the town acquisition of the water company impact taxes or increase taxes?
My understanding of the model that the committee's put together that they've worked with me on is that 100% of the debt service on the bonds issued to acquire would be paid through existing water rate revenues. So no tax impact whatsoever.
Done all by ratepayer
Correct.
funding. Okay. And a question some people who have children in the school and are concerned about those needs. Why would the town want to do this when we just spent a lot of new money on a new middle school?
You want to answer that? I can. Well, again, just to kind of underscore what Ted just said, the cost of acquisition and operation and maintenance would be borne by the ratepayers, so not taxpayers. It would be, according to the 3 criteria the committee evaluated and used as hurdles for making any kind of recommendation to the board, would be rate transparent to ratepayers. This is a time where the cost of borrowing is low, particularly with the town having a AAA rating. And the savings to the ratepayers would accrue in the first year. So there's no negative cash flow associated with acquisition.
You know, I would add a couple of other things to that, and that's around the capital side of it. We've heard repeatedly from Aquarian and also in the committee's discussion that we have an aging infrastructure, of which in either model the ratepayer is paying. In the model where Aquarian maintains ownership, the capital that they currently invest is all that we put in going forward. Otherwise, their rates would go up substantially, and in the models that we show, we'll be able to derive savings that we can put into increasing life expectancy of the assets by replacement. While service has improved dramatically in the last year, and the communications with Aquarian is starkly different than it was before, brakes aren't changing. Main service brakes are still there, and they're going to continue. In my estimation, they're going to continue in ever increasingly higher frequencies because it's like a car. It's getting older. The more you drive it and the less you put into it, the more likely you're going to break down. And every one of those brakes takes money away from the capital program so we can fix it, and less to go into renovations to the system that are necessary to avoid those breaks in the future.
Anything you wanted to add, John? No. Nope. A question that's come up, I mean, it was obvious from my own experience in private, we don't have return to equity. That's not an obligation of a municipal owner. So there's, and under the current rate structure, that's a 10.25% earnings objective that Aquarian has, but that is an obligation they have to their shareholder. But what other reasons why we might have so many savings?
Well, you first have to, as I'm sure you know, by the way, let me just back up for a minute. We've gone through this at least in 3 public sessions, I think, where we've gone into some detail back in August, September, and October, where we have reviewed in depth, I think, the details behind the financial model. So some of this may be repetitive, but forgive me if it is. You know, the water rates are basically cost-driven. So what the ratepayers of Hingham, Hull and Cohasset are paying are the costs that have been approved by the Department of Public Utilities, plus a rate of return on those costs. So what we needed to do was to understand thoroughly the cost structure. And there's really nothing magic about the cost structure. It's all kind of laid out there in great detail in the Department of Public Utility reports and in the Aquarian filings. And we also had 3 meetings, and I want to publicly thank John Walsh and Troy Dixon, who's the finance guy that we dealt with, for their cooperation in this. We had 3 very good meetings. Ted was participating in those meetings, where we really came to a pretty thorough understanding of the costs that made up the $12,351,583 that ratepayers in Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset are paying in 2012. And those costs are sort of divided into 3 categories. The big chunk of the cost relates to the water treatment plant. That's about $4.7 million of the $12.3 million. Then there are other costs such as depreciation, federal income taxes, and the return on the rate base. We identified those costs that municipal ownership would not incur, okay? And those costs added up to about $3.3 million per year.
So taxes, and say again, Ed, for the benefit.
Federal income taxes, taxes other than federal income taxes, state income taxes, the return on the rate base, and another number is depreciation. The town would not incur depreciation because it's establishing a new cost basis for the assets going forward. So it doesn't inherit depreciation. Those costs added up to $3.3 million. So you've got the water treatment plant cost, these other costs, federal income taxes, return on the rate base, and the third category of costs are what they call operating and maintenance costs, O&M costs. And those were of the, they total about $1.5 million. And Hingham's share of those costs are a little over $1 million. And they include things, again, that the municipal ownership would not have to incur. Water purchased for resale, rate case filing expenses, shared office costs, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, Oxford's legal fees. So customer satisfaction survey, and rent expense for offices not located in Hingham. Those costs, again, were $1 million. So you take the $3.3 million in rate of return costs, the $1 million in O&M costs, and then you get into what costs could be eliminated by municipal ownership of the water treatment plant. And there are, the big component there is what they call percent rent and adjustment factor. And it's a surcharge for volume usage over, I believe, 30 million gallons a month. It would take someone like Stephen Hawking to understand how that adjustment factor is truly calculated. I've said that before, that's not a new joke. But it still means that it's very complicated. But anyway, when you add up all those costs that would not be incurred by through municipal ownership, they add up to a little over $5 million a year. So that's where the bulk of the savings come from, by stripping out and eliminating costs that municipal ownership would not have to incur were it to buy the water company.
I'll just add what Ed described were the takes, if you will. In other words, the comparison corporate to municipal ownership. We also went through and model and added some costs to address items that we were uncertain whether or not, how they would be addressed, particularly billing and collections. If there were to be an outsourced firm, management from within the town of the outsourced contract. So we actually took out costs that we didn't think the town would incur, and then we added in costs just to make sure that we were producing a viable financial outcome.
Right.
The question, how do we know the town's capable of running a water company? That came up in the very first discussion.
Well, Ted's answered this several times, but I guess I would give you my 2 cents worth. The town has operated an electric utility for some period of time. It also has operated an elder housing facility, Lincoln School Apartments, for a number of years, very successfully. And I would say, finally, from the committee's perspective, as I mentioned when discussing engineering, I think the committee would recommend that the town, at least at the outset, retain an outsourcing firm that would bring best practices and instant knowledge of running a water utility, and let the town manage the manager as opposed to, from the start, trying to manage the water company itself. Downstream, evaluate, and then make whatever changes seemed appropriate.
Let me just pick up on a point that you made. Question was asked by a gentleman sitting in the audience tonight in terms of the interest rate. And of course, anybody who can predict interest rates wouldn't be sitting here. We'd be all someplace else. Yeah. So the question is, there are advantages in our municipal structure, that are not available to private owners. And if I could ask Ted, just to remind folks, was it 3 weeks ago we floated a $40 million bond where we consolidated a lot of our debt, and the interest we paid for a year.
Our interest rate for a year was 18.17 basis points. Of course, 100 basis points would be 1%.
So it's 0.1817%.
Correct.
So those of you who took finance, there's no DY/DX to this. This is a straight number. It's 0.2%.
Slightly less than 0.2%.
Just to remind folks, the price we paid for that interest floating for $40 million was $72,000 net in interest. So that's a big advantage of the AAA from a town that has a good bang. Now, the longer term now, and as we all know, there's a great discussion going on today whether things should be long or short. And, I'm not going to discuss what our financial strategy as a town is, but that is something with our outside advisors we continually watch, as should we be short-term or long-term. And all you have to do is get up every morning, listen to NPR as I do, and there's an eternal debate about what's the right course of action. But even at current rates, the long-term rates are very favorable for us as
Correct. I mean, long-term rates are still very favorable. They've inched up substantially the last 3 weeks. And our financial advisors would argue to us that those rates are not going to stay where they are at the moment. But the spread between long and short is almost at a record level right now, which would argue for us to stay with our short-term rates. We are the only community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that can issue short-term debt for greater than 2 years. We could issue 20 one-year notes if we wanted to. We're the only community we have special enabling legislation that allows us to do that. We just have to make a principal payment after the second year.
So that adds to the significance of the savings.
If we decided to stay in the short-term market in perpetuity, we could do that.
Okay. Let me just, Ted, to you again, if I may, that you had the discussion with John, with the town managers of Hull and Cohasset, maybe a little bit of meat on that?
Sure.
What those discussions involved?
We met with the managers from Hull and Cohasset. Hull obviously receives 100% of their water from Hingham. Cohasset, a very small portion. They have about 300 customers that are receiving water through the Hingham system. And both managers expressed a desire to work with the town through an intermunicipal agreement to purchase water and participate in the acquisition if the town decided to go in that direction.
Let me not continue to monopolize the discussion of Paul. I'll turn it over if you have some comments or questions that you might have.
Absorbing it all, does the water company presently use any of the money that it gets from Hingham to pay for its other operations elsewhere, or do we know anything about that?
I wouldn't look at it that way, Paul. I think, as I said, the total revenue raised by Aquarian in Massachusetts is $16,553,000. And of that, 7.6 million, I'm sorry, 12.3 million is what is raised through Hingham. The other 5 million or so, 4 million, is revenue charged to Oxford and to Millbury. We share some costs, for example. It's not so much revenue sharing as much as it's cost sharing. We absorb some of the costs that have to do with operating the Oxford and Millbury facilities, such as their legal costs and the office costs, office expenses, things of that sort. So,
are most of the water companies in the Commonwealth owned by the towns, or water operations?
Well, Aquarian owns the water operations or the franchise operations in 5 communities, the ones we mentioned: Cohasset, Hingham, Hull, Millbury, and Oxford. And I believe there's a few municipalities in the western part of the state that receive water from private companies, a handful. I don't think it's more than 12 communities throughout the whole Commonwealth.
Okay.
So the vast majority of systems are owned by the municipality, and actually owned and operated by municipal workers.
Did they start that way, or are they, 2 questions, did the ones that are owned by the municipalities, are they single municipalities, and do they go way, way back? Because ours is very unusual.
I can't tell you how all of them are started, but there are a number of municipalities that have water and sewer services that are across borders. But the predominant model is municipal ownership of a sole water source within their community.
So it's just single, it's not like regional type or 3 or 4 towns?
I would say the single largest one would be a single ownership model.
John and Ed, are you going to be giving us a package for those of us that like to go through everything and then come up with 1,003 questions? As Ed knows. And no, Ed, I don't
I'm
want
happy
your
to give you
bag.
anything you want, anything.
I know. But when you ran your models,
Yeah.
did you put bounds on them? Like what might be a good price on one end? What do we need to stay within to make this deliver the savings? And then did you vary the cost of capital programs? Because if we go municipal, do we now go prevailing wage?
Yeah, we would. You know, we built some cushions into the model. One cushion, which I think John referred to tonight, which we haven't built into the model, but it's there, and I sort of reserving that as the penultimate cushion, I guess, is the fact that the operating and maintenance costs, which we've built into the model and escalated out 22 years at the rate of 3% a year, the outsourcing estimate that we've received, is almost $1 million less per year than what we have built into the model. So you multiply that out, the $70 to $90 million savings that I mentioned over a 22-year period. In theory, if we went to outsourcing, you could add another $22 million a year to those savings numbers, because that's the cost of operating and maintenance if we were to outsource, if that's the way we went.
One of the questions I asked the manager in Cohasset, actually, just to get a sense when we were meeting with the outsourcing companies, is this realistic? And in fact, they saw substantial savings in those percent ranges when they went from their old contract to their new vendor 2 years ago.
When you were discussing with the outsourcing, did that include an aggressive capital program too? Do they do everything?
Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing to what Ed said in terms of the model. We were not only conservative in the way that Ed just described, but the rate of escalation of cost that we heard from the outsourcer year to year is actually lower than what we built into the model in terms of municipal ownership. So there's savings twice. Your question was in terms of purchase price. Could you ask it again, Irma?
That's okay. When you're running your models,
Yeah.
did you find, let's call it an ends? What would be where are you comfortable price-wise,
Right.
purchase price-wise, delivering the savings?
Right.
What the range is?
We did, and that really was the reason that we established the criteria of rate transparency. In other words, where cash flow went negative, that would be a violation. That would be a cost that was too high, either because of operations and maintenance or acquisition. The point, and now I'm recollecting your question, in terms of capital reserve and the ability to accelerate infrastructure improvement, as Ted was relating, there are a couple of different ways to do it, or in combination ways to either use the annual surplus, the annual difference between projected costs from Aquarian, projected costs from municipal ownership, also in terms of borrowing, and still having rate transparency, just as was done with Lincoln School Apartments, establish a capital reserve that enables acceleration without it hitting ratepayers' bills, and have enough there to begin to really move significantly faster in terms of improvement.
Could you have a different capital structure for each of the 3
And
towns?
that's the last piece. Yes, we talked about, and as Ted alluded to, the town managers of both Hull and Cohasset were amenable, again, subject to the approval of their boards, to a town-specific capital surcharge, so that if Hingham were to aggressively start developing South Shore Park, those capital infrastructure costs would not impact Hull ratepayers. and vice versa if Hull were to embark upon accelerated improvement of its infrastructure, which is older than Hingham's, the preponderance of which, I think 46% is pre-1920. They could do that, and Hingham's ratepayers wouldn't feel the pain of that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Paul has another question.
Can you quantify the age of the existing system in Hingham with respect to piping and whatnot, and the need to upgrade, and give us any sense as to how long that would take, or are we just going to be in a continual?
Well, there's two good sources of information. One is a presentation that John has given on a couple of occasions. I think actually on July 11th of last year, there was a bar chart that showed for the respective towns the age of the transmission and distribution system. The other documents, and that is on our website, the other documents, Paul, that I referenced earlier, the Teta and Howard studies from 2007, 2011, which go in a very granular degree of detail, highlighting critical areas, and actually have phased recommendation for improvements. So there's a lot of good and fairly recent information. Could it be updated to the benefit of the town were it to proceed further? I'd say sure, but it's not as if it's so dated that it's not worth a great deal.
Okay.
Yeah, I just comment that was made earlier. I don't want people to miss on it. We had this discussion when we were engaged in what do we do with the Lincoln School apartments. Mm-hmm. And there was a great deal of concern about our financial ability to manage our real estate. And there was great discussion by some of us on this board as to the viability of that. And like this water study committee, we have good volunteers and some good financial management. And I guess, Ted, you could maybe add some numbers, if you wouldn't mind. I'm catching you off guard here, but what's happened in Lincoln School apartments? That would be a...
Well, so the town bought a $7 million property. So for those of you who have done real estate investment out there, the town bought a $7 million property with no money down and produced a positive cash flow from day one. That's generally a success on a real estate investment. It's more than a real estate investment, of course, to the town, because it provides outstanding A-class residential homes for 60 seniors and their families. And so, but in terms of cash flow, the town structured the ground lease with the Affordable Housing Trust such that it met debt service requirements. But as the debt service drops off, the town's position on the ground lease is going to stay the same, and the town is going to be in the recipient of $600,000 a year out of Lincoln School Apartments, and with a discussion with Lincoln School Apartments as to what we want to do with it, within the next 15 years. We're at the 5-year mark, and we're probably, I would say, $50,000 or $60,000 of difference between what our debt service was and what it is now. It's decreasing at about $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and that's creating that capacity. You'll have some enjoyable problems in the future.
John, what do you think the committee's, if we were to accept the recommendation, what would be the next steps that you would suggest?
Some committee members asked if we were done as of Tuesday night. I think at this point, my personal perspective, we would operate at the direction of the Board of Selectmen if the Board of Selectmen decided to move further. I think there are some areas, as I alluded to in the summary, that might be candidates for the board looking to the committee to provide assistance, perhaps creating RFPs for an engineering study or outsourcing firm, perhaps structuring the skeleton of the intermunicipal agreement, working with special counsel and the town council, and continuing perhaps in some of the negotiation that Ted and I have been engaged in a couple of our meetings. So those are possibilities. Again, we would operate at the behest of the Board of Selectmen.
And I would add one more, that if we get to the stage where we're going to issue an RFP for an operations manager, the committee has a number of members, one of which the chairman is very well-versed in how to structure operation agreements and the oversight of them. And so I think I would beg the indulgence of the board to not parole them yet.
How do we get to the number? How do we get to the price, the acquisition price? Is that your next question?
It is a question, but I wanted to deal with it. We've been on, John mentioned this, and let me back up for the benefit of everybody. There were 3 options for discussion: acquire, forget it, or negotiate. The forget it option is off the table. We think we would be remiss in our obligation if we pursued that avenue, given the numbers that you've heard this evening. In addition, the option, what does acquire mean and what does negotiate mean? And we have been in discussion with Aquarian, I think particularly since January, over what could be various conclusions. I would be remiss in not telling you that they have informed us continuously that they are not for sale. However, that doesn't stop us from just what's in the best interest of the town. So I have I've had discussions with Chuck Verlot personally, between the 2 of us, directly and in the presence of some of the people in this room. But the discussions have been, as I said, very businesslike, and the numbers that we've been discussing, we heard where Aquarian was at. John referenced it in his remarks, at the 190 million, and we have another number. And I also promised Chuck that I would not negotiate in the public, because this is a private and public transaction that would require, I don't have the authority. I have to get not only these 2 people to my left and right, but town meeting to agree to that. And town meeting in our world has the final decisive authority. Chuck, as the president, also doesn't have sole authority. He reports to a board of directors. So whatever price, if that were a successful outcome, it certainly has advantages for both, but there are business decisions that they have to make, which I fully respect. That has to do with what is their future plans. They are part of a big, as I mentioned, investment trust. How does this fit with their long-term plans? But to get at the price, I would be remiss in not sharing with you an article in a paper 2 weeks ago, John, in Connecticut. Aquarian bought a water property, or is engaged in buying a water property, according to the press. So I don't have this on Aquarian's, they have not told me this, but in the press it reported that it was book value, was the price that they paid. Now, it's easy to say when you have share owners and towns involved, how you negotiate at that level is something that you work out. And that hopefully would be the discussion, that and the area we would pursue is a negotiated settlement at whatever a price was mutually agreeable. And then finally, the most important thing for us is whatever we did, it has to be aired and discussed at town meeting. And it would be town meeting's final authority. No matter what any of us thought, town meeting would have to be convinced that this is the right thing for the town of Hingham. So what you're hearing tonight is a discussion of the first phase and a sharing of what we might need to do to bring this to a town meeting vote. Now, there had been some rumors in the press about a special town meeting in the fall. That has not been decided. You've had some other work, and plus, as I said, I'm in negotiation, and I don't know where that's going, and they haven't shared with me where that's going. So that's another issue that has to be bridged. But it certainly, there is no missing the fact that this will go to town meeting at some point if it is decided to buy it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before I open it up for questions? Anybody? Irma or Paul? No. Hey, I'd like to open it up for questions from the public. So, Paul, you're back. Good.
Sounds like a broken record.
Paul, yeah, could you come, excuse me, could I ask you to come to the microphone so the folks at home, sometimes they can't hear you. I can hear you, but it's not.
Peter Stathopoulos, 17 Volusia Road. Question I asked Tuesday, and I don't know if anything's changed, but is a detailed cost analysis available for me now? At Tuesday, you said no, based on advice of counsel.
That would still be my answer, but I think what Chairman Rebuffo has said is that there are discussions ongoing that are in the realm of negotiation, so I think there's another reason for
the details that, if I could just add, as I promised, the details that when there is something to put forth in the public, the details will be put forth. At the moment,
Would we have enough time is the big question.
Oh, sure.
If we're talking a special town meeting, there definitely isn't time.
well, until we have a number, there is time.
Right.
There is time, and there's
Okay.
nothing sacred about a special town meeting either.
All right, the other one was, and I have to point out that you were saying one of the immediate savings was on depreciation. Well, that's a false savings because there's a capital offset to that. So you may have $1,000 of depreciation, but you may have $100,000 in capital expenditures. Was that? So depreciation is funny money, all right? That is a form of amortizing the cost of a capital outlay. And to me, is town government overlooking that approach of depreciation for any capital projects. But you have a financial analysis, you have an accounting analysis. Depreciation is not an accounting. So when you say there's a savings of, I forget, 4 million or whatever it was, there has to be some huge figure for a capital outlay. And one of the reasons I would look at the cost analysis is say, where are all your capital outlays year by year? The Acord Park Tower, for example, what would that cost? One of the other, I have a lot of questions because I'm very concerned of this because I've seen other things that the town has done that maybe I should have spoken up, but I didn't. And this is one that I feel offers it gives us maybe a bad decision once it's made. I don't want to use the slippery slope analogy because I don't like that. But, you talk about outsourcing and you talked about consultants. Would we be going through an RFQ before we go into an RFP?
I'm not sure that there would be a need to go through an RFQ process. I think there are probably 5 or 6 firms that have national experience with water utilities in this volume range.
Have they been consulted, or a number of them?
No, not yet. I think that would be premature, but if
Yeah.
the board decided to proceed, we would certainly follow state procurement guidelines.
It just, one of the things that I see is that, this is a major step for the town.
Question.
All right? And it may be fully cost justified, but.
Can I ask you, let me just, before you get on to that one, on the RFP process, that's a very deliberate, focused process in terms of identifying what we would get and what we would have to pay for what we get.
Right.
So what we did, we could not go through an RFP process because there's no authority for a project yet.
Right.
But what we did do is say, let's talk to people in the field, not only those who deliver the service, but also to other towns that have embarked on such an arrangement and validate the range of our options. And those options are, as Ed has explained, that range is in the study.
Right. Well, usually when there's a major acquisition, as I mentioned, I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank doing cost benefits.
And I didn't blame you for our current.
Yeah, I know you didn't. Thank you very much. So, but if on a big project, the first thing we'd send out is RFI, request for information. We're looking at acquiring the water company here, and you would look at different approaches, maybe different municipalities. It's sort of like the one in upstate New York. 3 towns wanted to acquire it, and then after they did their study, they said it isn't worth it. So we're just, and
Let me just answer to that question, if I may, before you go on. We did have discussions with Goldman Sachs,
all right.
and they've given us some guidelines as to what they think if we were to engage them, which we have not yet. But we have talked with them as a means of, one, testing our thinking, and two, being sure we're not believing our own nonsense on this. So we're not here tonight to say we're going to buy.
No,
We're here
understand.
tonight to begin the education process to say, here's what we've done, and there's obviously more to do.
And I'd like to add to that, too, because in what you're describing in terms of an RFI, I think you could look at the study, this 13 months that we've spent, with using town volunteers as well as paid financial and legal experts, and I would say that's done a lot more than any RFIs that I've seen. We've done the research. I think the whole point of having the discussion with...
I'm not doubting what you're saying, but the problem is, you're telling me things, but you're not showing me things.
Oh, no, I don't agree with that either. I think if you go to the website, you will see upwards of 40 to 50 documents that are the documents that we've examined, the presentations that we've made all along the way. So, again, this isn't take our word for it. You can see the progression that we've made. The point that you're on, that we're saying not yet, but certainly before anything goes before a town meeting, is the kind of a detail that you'd like to see and that Irma asked about previously.
And again, if we're going to town meeting, I should have that information now to...
Well, we're not going to town meeting now.
No, I said if we're going in April, we need... Don't give me something in February or March, because I don't think that's fair at the level.
I agree.
We're making it public. Now, I asked for that information now, knowing that, I'm going to have some questions. I'm going to have some challenges, as you know, I would. So then, we look and, I have a lot of questions, because I've already seen the town make some bad investments, all right? And they constantly justify it by saying, let's go spend more money because we already own this, or something like that. I've seen some capital expenditures that never really had the full study put into it, and this is one. And then you're talking about outsourcing. Was Aquarium one of the ones you would look at for outsourcing? I mean, that's, to me, is...
That was one of the early discussions that we had with Aquarian in terms of option C, negotiated settlement. In other words, how would you like to outsource it? And got a response that was not too excited about it.
Right.
So
I could see that. But
May I address your point on depreciation just for a moment? Not to get too technical here, but what I said we would eliminate is a number like 1.3 million in depreciation that's in O&M, okay? And that's the depreciation on the assets we would be inheriting, the charge that's built into the current rate structure.
right.
If and when we acquire the company, we establish a whole new asset base.
All right.
And the cost of that is reflected, in lieu of depreciation, it's reflected in the debt service, the price that we pay and the amortization of that debt service. That's not to say there's not depreciation, but it's factored into the model through debt service. So you're right, but we do consider depreciation.
Well, see, one of the things I would look for in cost analysis,
Yeah.
one item that comes, is the Acorn Park Tower. What is the cost for that? Since it's a one-time cost under municipal accounting versus,
We have also, and I don't know whether we mentioned this earlier or not tonight, if we did, forgive me, but we have built into,
so forgive me for being late.
we forgive you. We've built into the model capital expenditures of $1.4 million a year, unspecified as to what those would be, but there's a placeholder in the model for the next 22 years of $1.4 million a year. That's in the model.
And let me just add to the tower. Irma has raised that question with us, and the answer is we've had discussions about the maintenance and the improvements that have to be made with that and what that's all about, and that requires, I won't give you the definitive answer, but the answer is it's on the radar to be defined in detail. So That's the reason we're having these discussions, to bring out, to make sure that before we go to town meeting, we have those questions answered.
Well, let's say before you release the cost analysis, which would be prior to the town meeting.
That's right.
And I would expect to see a lot of capital things projected down there.
I would, go ahead.
You know, we talked about the cost of capital, and I would expect some discounted cash flows would be in your favor. So we just, you know, I just.
Excuse me, we're getting.
Sorry.
Okay, all right, thank you, Bob.
All right.
It's TV production, yeah. Irma.
A question for
wanna see
John
me
and
there,
Pete,
so.
you'll probably be interested in this too. A question for you two. Are there any stranded costs or embedded costs that we would carry for equipment and stuff, capital stuff, that is no longer being used, but you still carry it because it hasn't aged off?
Haven't retired it.
Right, it's, I know it is embedded investment or stranded costs.
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, do we have the equivalent of coal-fired plants
No.
that are still on the books,
No, we wouldn't have stranded costs in this
or
model.
embedded investments?
Or embedded investments, because we're acquiring and
You're
we're starting fresh.
establishing a new asset base.
The one issue that came up was the leakage question and the rate case decision recently by the DPU to make sure that Aquarian fixes, because the leakage problem they have, and it's been up and down, and it's in, the poorer communities are in the 25% range of water loss, and I believe, John, if my memory's right, help me on this one, 20% or 18 to 20, something like that.
I think that right now, the unaccounted for water, there's a threshold, 10% threshold that DEP establishes. I think Aquarian is sitting right now at maybe 16. John knows this stuff backward and forward. There's certainly been an improvement. I think several years ago was in the 20s, so it's gotten better, but I don't think it's sitting where DEP would like to see it.
So that's more the question of, to Irma's point, that's the issue that has to be fixed, no matter who owns it, by the way.
Right. And I want to add that point, too. Your questions about capital and infrastructure improvement are good ones. And I would refer you to the two Tata and Howard documents that are on the website, because they will be, if not the final answer, they would be the starting point. And actually, there were cost estimates made for the phases. Now, whether those costs are still viable is, the answer is probably not. They would need some updating, but the prioritization would probably still be reasonably accurate.
Is the plan to provide a total facilities plan for everyone to see beforehand? Because I'll go back to Lincoln School Apartments. When we began that journey, as I recall, and I can't remember which of the state organizations, because they changed their alphabet soup, came and gave us an overview, or one of their consultants, that everything was hunky-dory. And we would have just a measured capital investment. And then the residents told us a little more information, like windows that didn't shut. So we had planned for a very different capital program. And the Tata, and Pete, you need to go up there and read those two, but you also need to have a good chunk of time to do it. They're very good, but they're very detailed. Is somebody going to put that together so if we do go forward, there's no surprises?
Well, I think that was one of the items that the board, if the board elected to proceed further, to get an updated capital infrastructure study by a good, reputable engineering firm would probably be a wise course of action, because then it would produce exactly what you're inquiring about and might address some of these questions as well.
Okay.
I think that, I think one of the issues that you'll have to deal with going forward is, what do you do with the savings if you go forward? And do you invest savings in prospective fixes, in repairs, or do you wait to fix? I mean, it depends on what you do. I mean, the savings can be, the difference can be passed on to the ratepayers in terms of reductions in the water rates, or lower increases in the water rates, or it can be invested in capital. That's a decision that, we're not in a position to make at this point. But
we don't
it's,
have near the
those are the choices.
information.
That's going to be a choice.
Right.
Did you consider an enterprise fund? There's a possibility there.
It would almost definitely be in an enterprise fund for all three communities.
Right.
That would be part of the intermunicipal
Yeah.
agreement. Okay, Peter? Okay, thank you.
So
Your
far.
question. So far, I know we'll hear from you.
Oh, yes.
That's
I'm a broken record.
No, you're not. No, you keep us on our toes. Are there any other questions from the audience that people would like to raise from what they've heard this evening? Mr. Duff. I'll let Roger go. You have the floor, Roger. Roger Sullivan, Garrison Road.
Roger Sullivan, 40 Garrison Road. If I may just start with an observation, and it's a serious one. I'm not joking. But when we talked about the difference between the taxpayers and the ratepayers, with few exceptions, they're the same people. I mean, and that's not just a flippant remark, because it's different with the sewer. I mean, if you don't have sewer, then you're, as a taxpayer, you're not paying for it. The ratepayers are paying for it. But with the water company, the ratepayer and the taxpayer are the same people.
Right.
Now,
But there
my
is a
question is,
there is a numerical difference. There
There are about 283 people that are served by wells, not by Aquarian.
And by Weymouth. Weymouth.
And by Weymouth and, right.
yeah,
Yep.
So-
in a
and that would-
population of 22,000
Yeah,
people.
you're right.
Okay. Now, my question is, what it seems to me we're doing is now we have a system where we have a water system which is run by a private company and owned by a private company. And what you're proposing is to go to a system which will be run by a private company and owned by the town. And that, to me, translates into simply shifting the risk from the private company to the town. Now, I used to live in Bethesda, Maryland. And Montgomery County has a water system run by the county, and there was an article in the Washington Post last week saying that in the 70s, when the county was expanding rapidly, the county government, in its wisdom to save money, decided to expand the water system with concrete pipes. And these concrete pipes were put in 74, 75, 76. They are now all falling apart. And they have, with the pressure in the pipes, they're even having them explode, and to danger to people in downtown Bethesda, where the manhole covers are actually being thrown up in the air by these exploding pipes. The municipal water company in D.C. says, we know what had done such a stupid thing, but that's what county governments do. And that the county now faces a $1.6 billion potential bill, to say nothing of the liabilities, to try to correct this thing. So I just say, I don't see the merit in having a similar or identical administration of the water system, but taking on all the risk.
That's a good point to make, because as many people know, I'm not only an investor, but I spent my entire life in a private business. And the question that I have asked from the start is, should we be in this business? And I'm asking that question still, but as the questions get answered to the benefit of the people I now currently serve, then I say, I haven't found the quotes, as John has used the expression, showstopper. You raise good points about caution about government, but I would also remind you that we had Union Street, and we left in the hands of the private investor. And that's what started this whole process, because the private investor didn't do what we thought they should do as the paying customer. So it works both ways, and the caution you raise is a good caution. And what are the safeguards when we come to a conclusion that we put into it to make sure that we don't become the next Bethesda? And that's an excellent point. Are there other questions? Chief Duff.
Good evening, Mark Duff, 37 Bradley Park Drive, Fire Chief. Interesting point about risk, which I was not going to address tonight, but the town of Hingham, despite the fact that the town of Hingham does not own the water company or water system, we own the fire hydrants. And we have to maintain the hydrants. And the risk on whether that hydrant works or not is on the Hingham Fire Department. If there's not water there, it's his problem. But if the hydrant fails, it's on us already. And that's where your huge risk is. I'm one of probably 2 or 3 fire chiefs in the state, if not the whole country, that has to, as one of my responsibilities, maintain fire hydrants. It doesn't happen anywhere, except in Hingham, perhaps Oxford, and whatever, and Hull, of course. I have to send firefighters out to paint hydrants. I have to hire the contractors to replace them. I have to maintain a stock of hydrants over at the fire station. We have to trim them. We have to put markers on them in the fall to make sure we can find them in the snow and take them off in the spring. That isn't something a fire department should be doing. That's something that a normal DPW would be doing, or a company that runs the water system for you, a publicly owned company. We don't have a flushing program. The hydrants should be flushed at least every other year, if not every year. Every hydrant in the whole system should be turned on and run. It doesn't happen. We have a very good relationship with the Aquarian water, a very good relationship, and it has got better with John. But these are problems and things that should be happening that aren't, and things that the fire department, firefighters, paramedics should not be doing. They have better things to do than to be painting fire hydrants. Although we do have a great senior tax work-off program that does some of that for us.
Hey, let me interrupt you, Chief. So your point, I just want to make sure I understand your point. Right now, you're doing work that Aquarian doesn't do.
Correct.
And that you have to incur taxpayer dollars to perform.
Correct.
That's your point.
Correct. And that's a hidden cost.
That is a Hingham cost, and the cost of fire hydrants, and that has been considered. But let me just make sure I understand your point. Nothing changes if Aquarian still does this. Your life goes on as it is under the current arrangement. The question is, could it change? And this is a good question. If we owned it, and what would be the cost for that change if we shifted that burden from you to some other entity that would be responsible?
Well, it would be, correct.
The work doesn't stop.
Correct. It still has to be done.
It still has to be done, but the question is, your issue is, I've got professionals in another industry doing it, and it should be somebody else.
Taking out expensive fire engines, et cetera, tying up people.
Understood.
Do you know if Cohasset, stay on the fire hydrants, do you know who does it in Cohasset, where they have their own municipal? Do you all know who does it?
The water system has 1,311 hydrants currently. 1,311.
That includes Hull.
Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset altogether.
A couple more points I'd like to make. There are streets in Hingham that do not have hydrants on them. And they now, many of those streets have $1 million homes on them. Cushing Street, Abington Street, Lozelle Street, Butler Road, Sherwood Road, parts of Levitt Street, parts of Turkey Hill Lane, parts of East Street. We had a fire the other night, a serious fire the other night on East Street. And even though recent improvements have been made on East Street and the water main upgrade, it didn't logistically work out to put in a hydrant down there. We had to go to 1,200. We had to go 1,200 feet to find a working fire hydrant. It shouldn't have been more than 400 feet. Had that hydrant not worked, it would have been even a longer distance.
But that too, Chief, that is a problem you have today that we've got to fix,
Yeah,
regardless of who owns it.
Yes.
That means somebody's going to pay.
Correct.
And it's probably us.
Correct.
Whatever.
I think the big point that I'm trying to make, Bruce, is this isn't something a fire department should be doing. This is something a public utility should be doing.
But it's a factor that we should consider in our analysis, and I think that's the point you're making. Yeah.
Can we ask John and Ed, can we find out what Cohasset does? Where they have their own, and where you did query
Thanks, Chief.
that group as doing for outsourcing?
Okay, and we got, I know we looked at, John, in a discussion on the fire hydrant maintenance, because there's savings to the cost of the town coupled with...
Another point is it bugs me that I have to go out and hire a private contractor with a backhoe and a dump truck privately when we own our own.
Yeah.
and I can't use them.
Okay.
So,
The
and then some other
political
issues, too.
speech, so noted. I got the message.
I mean, I don't expect Randy Sylvester to be an expert on water distribution, but it does
But he
not
can't
make
fight
a
a
lot
fire
of
either.
sense that,
Yeah.
well, and I'm not a water distribution engineer.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. Okay. Are there any other questions? Kathy, please.
Catherine Salisbury, 10 Ridgewood Crossing. As you know, I'm an old member of the Water Supply Committee, and we did a similar study back in 1985. I'm just noting a difference here. At that time, that study was very, we stated all of our assumptions. We hired, two consultants, Weston and Sampson, to do the engineering part because we wanted to know what we were looking at as far as buying. What are we buying? What shape is it in? And then the financial part, what would we have to pay? And the assumptions of what we would have to pay were laid all out in the report in writing, and specifically the charter. If you followed the charter, what would you have to pay? And that isn't a negotiated settlement. That's just, if you followed the charter, what would you have to pay? And it may be an unreasonable, outrageous sum, but that is hardly negotiated. That's just a matter of figuring it out, with pencil and paper. And I think the citizens, at least should know what that number is. What does the charter say? The charter has this formula. We never believed it, frankly. We never believed it on the committee either, that we would ever have to pay for it, but at least they figured it out on paper and pencil. And I think that much should be produced by this committee and made public immediately. I mean, you can make the same assumption, this is stupid, we know there's no way on earth that this formula is ever going to be enforced by a court, but at least people should know what the formula, produces as far as a number. I am concerned a little bit about the business of, we're in negotiations. And I guess I would ask, is there an end point on these negotiations? Is this going to go on forever, or does the, does the Board of Selectmen have an end point where they say, okay, we tried in every good faith effort to negotiate a settlement with Aquarian, and we could not do it? And are you going to stop at some point? And if so, are you at that point going to try the eminent domain route, the fair market value route, or will you have another hearing about that? Or what will you do? This isn't going to go on forever, I hope. At some point you'll decide, okay, enough is enough. We've tried very hard and we cannot. So I guess that's one question I have.
Okay, let me take a stab at that. And my lawyers are going crazy if I answer this, but no, it won't go on forever.
Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to ask for anything that I shouldn't know.
But let me answer that. No, it will not go on forever.
All right.
The stated objective is to get to a negotiated settlement.
Right. You'll put a reasonable period of...
Whatever that is. Okay. We're still talking.
All right.
It's businesslike. It's active. And that's the message I've been getting, and that's the message they have been receiving. And you can ask the two people in the front row if that's their understanding. Now,
I'm asking you. I mean, representing the
I can
town,
only negotiate.
Representing me, I'm interested in what the town, how far the town, and if you cannot negotiate it, are you going to go that next step?
There are other steps we could take, and I can tell you we did look at eminent domain in great detail. Okay. The advice from the attorneys who did that analysis for us was the statute is a better approach. You will recall that at the 2012 town meeting, the entire discussion by Aquarian was on the subject of eminent domain. That was one of the first subjects we went to look at. We engaged 3 attorneys, 3 different firms, to see if that's an option. It's always an option. It's just whether or not, how much is it going to cost you, and when. So that's not a preferred cost.
Okay.
But we're still in the first negotiated settlement stage.
Do you have any estimate at all as far as, time period?
Could be over tomorrow. It could be.
You hope it'll be.
I'm hoping it'll be happening soon.
All right.
That's all. We have to make a decision. If we're going to have a special town meeting, this board would have to decide whether or not, would there be one? And if not, it's going to be next town meeting. Okay.
One other comment, and this is nothing, this is just a comment, I presume this is okay?
Sure.
It's not a question, it's a comment. From my observation from working for many other towns that have water, municipal water systems, one of the downsides that haven't been mentioned that anybody who's familiar with it knows about is the political pressure that is put upon political elected representatives who serve as water commissioners or whatever to do whatever it is outraged citizenry wants them to do. And political people, being political people, of course, want to keep people happy. So they will do, if they're good, they will do what they have been asked to do. And of course, that is going to cost money, and that's going to raise rates. 1.4 for capital expenditures every year obviously is too small, but your savings, and your savings might give you another 1.4 million capital expenditures, but the political will of the town may be that you have $6.8 million in capital expenditures, and then, of course, rates are going up. When I was on the Water Supply Committee, we actually went into Boston, we filed briefs, and we fought very hard to keep that rate of return down. And we would have all kinds of, economic analysis and all this kind of stuff saying why it was unreasonable to, to have whatever the rate of return was. We would be unhappy with it, whatever it was, and to fight that to keep it down. And that was a very important job, was fighting to keep that rate of return down, also to look at operation and maintenance and see if those expenses are legitimate and everything else.
Can I just add a thought, because you raise a very good caution, and what's different? And what's different now, and they're in the room, they can attest to this, it's not just that we haven't done what you had set as a path for us on in terms of fighting or disagreeing with the Department of Public Utilities.
You have in the past. I'm not saying the town has.
But let me just tell you what is different.
Right.
Her name is Martha Coakley, and she is now actively engaged in being visibly present, not only at the rate hearings, which she was not at in prior life, but we've approached her in this study to make sure that we're not all wet. Are we okay? Is this something the citizens of the do? Because her new approach has been, I want to protect the citizens. And the disappointment that some of us have had, those two of us up here had to deal with the DPU. And it has changed dramatically from our days. And whose side are they on? And what is their responsibility? And their charter has changed. So we want to be sure that you're making a good point, that make sure the political pressure is somehow insulated from a good financial investment that gives the service that people want. And that's the great guideline.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a good guideline. Okay.
I'd like to add one. You asked about the statutory charter formula. We've talked with numerous attorneys who have done extensive research into cases decided by the Supreme Judicial Court, talked with industry experts, all of whom would make the point that the charter formula price in that run-on sentence in Section 11 of Chapter 139 is not a formula that doesn't have alternative interpretations. So,
I agree. I absolutely agree.
okay.
But all I'm saying is we, even utilizing the same methodology that we used in our 1985 report, which you can argue is flawed, but just for, chuckles, using that same formula, there must be a way for you to figure out what the present, value of that formula is. And if nothing else, to poke fun at it, it would be interesting to know what that number
Well,
was. 26 million back when 1985. What is it now?
Again, I'm not being artful here, but we have taken several different approaches to calculating what we believe is an accurate purchase price under an alternative set of interpretations of the statutory formula, and have found what I will call a grouping that is remarkably close, those numbers one to another. I can't go into more detail because, frankly, it would jeopardize the town's litigation position, but I will tell you we've done that work and validated it with...
Well, a good investigative reporter charter and get the formula.
Yeah. Well,
You probably
please
know
send them to us.
Thank you, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments or observations that people would like to make in this evening? Okay. You have suggested to us that we approve your recommendation, and that is the issue before the board. It is not, as I'll repeat, it is not an issue to say we are buying. It's saying the study has come to a phase where it needs to move forward in a deliberate fashion to the issues that John has addressed, and to continue the negotiation. Am I saying that correctly, so from the committee's point of view? Okay. So,
We don't have a vote, but...
yeah, we do have a vote.
We do?
Yes.
It's the third on your vote
Third
list.
vote
Oh,
on
the third. Oh. What exactly are we voting?
I haven't seen the vote that's before you,
It's a
but...
one-liner.
But I guess if I were
Recommendations.
to echo, sure, if I were to echo what the committee voted Tuesday night, it would be that the board take the initial steps forward towards potential acquisition of the water company.
But the steps would then, the outcome of the steps would come back with a number? A range of numbers?
Well, I think you still have options A and C. I mean, there's a negotiation that's underway, so I wouldn't instantly assume that it's option A. Option C may, tomorrow morning, you may have that answer.
All options have to go back to town meeting.
Oh, I understand.
So all the board would be doing is accepting the recommendations of the committee and proceeding with a negotiation or another form of acquisition that would have to be ultimately approved by town meeting.
But then it comes back to us,
Correct.
the Board of Selectmen?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
that-
yes.
Will it be choices or a choice? It will be
Well, if it's a negotiated sale, it'll be,
that.
I can't answer that question. If I'm in
Okay.
negotiation, I go one course. If I'm in another form of acquisition, I go a different course. That's work.
all of which has to be approved every step along the way by the full Board of Selectmen.
That's the
So if it
issue.
turns out that negotiations stall and some other approach has to be taken, the board would have to endorse that other approach.
And that would be public?
Correct.
Okay.
All the votes would have to be public. That's a different way of negotiating. It
Very
is.
different.
Very different. Okay.
I'll make a motion then. To approve the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee recommendations.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, John and Ed.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
We have a couple of other issues. Ted, there's an issue dealing with the farmer's market sign.
Correct.
Yes.
And you have a item here in your vote list.
The farmer's market?
Yeah, let me just...
I'll read that one. He's been getting them all tonight.
No, you got the first three. Come on, I
No, I
keep track. I keep
didn't.
tracking. I keep tracking. Go
So the
ahead.
farmer's market is looking to erect a sign, temporary sign. They've asked for a 30-day sign permit. They plan.
Could I ask the audience to just keep it down, please, so the folks at home can listen? Thank you. Okay.
So the farmer's market has applied for a 30-day temporary sign permit. In 2007, the board voted to authorize them to erect signs during the season for 3 locations. Right now, they're just asking for downtown. They're adhering to the sign bylaw in terms of a 2x2 sign. It will not be a sandwich board or A-frame type sign. It'll be a flat sign, viewable on both sides. And they want to erect the sign for about 30 hours per week, Tuesday to Wednesday. Essentially, you're giving them a 30-day window, and then they'll have to come back to you at the end of the 30 days if they want to extend it.
So they'd be back 2 or 3 times?
They could be back 2 or 3 times during the summer, correct? You don't have the ability to grant a permit greater than the 30-day period.
Okay.
And if I read Mary's memo,
Yep.
they will agree, they will adhere to all of our bylaws.
Yes.
Just like all the merchants do.
Correct.
Good.
Okay, so.
Can I do that one?
You can.
Can I do that one? Oh, my
Sure you
God.
can. This is a long one.
Yeah, at least it doesn't have any words I can't pronounce. Make a motion to grant permission to the farmer's market to place a temporary sign near the clock in the square for a 30-day period starting Tuesday, July 2nd, 2013, to advertise the Wednesday farmer's market. The sign will conform to all temporary sign regulations in size, in parens, 4 square feet, and style, in parens, no A-frame signs, and may be two-sided. This request is granted in recognition of the nature of the Hingham Farmers Market, which is similar to a street fair or community festival that brings value to the community by bringing residents together and encouraging consumption of local commodities.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Let me go see here. We have an appointment to make to the 4th of July Parade Committee. Herman, you want to?
Can I do that one too?
Sure. Go ahead.
I make a motion to appoint Deanna Costa to the 4th of July Parade Committee.
Okay. Do I have a
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And we want to thank the 4th of July Parade Committee for all their work.
Yeah, I just received this note this evening. There is additional information. The date of the fireworks relative to the 4th of July celebration is July the 6th. July the 6th. And the rain date would be July the 7th. And that's a change, as I understand.
Change from the 29th, correct.
Okay. All right, so I got... Sure. This is Susan Murphy, yeah.
Yes, I'm just speaking as a resident. What's nice, I mean, even though it's unfortunate it has to be moved, what's nice about the change in date is that the vintage baseball game is at 2 p.m. that day, July 6th.
Oh, that's
and
right.
on years in the past where they've ended up on the same date, people have been able to enjoy the game at Derby Academy and then go down to the harbor, have dinner, watch the fireworks. So I just encourage people to take advantage of all the festivities that day.
And the only problem with that day is that it's the first of the Evening Under the Stars concerts at the conservatory.
bad. That's too bad.
It is.
Well,
And heaven only knows what else.
we're not playing a night game, so that doesn't compete. Okay, and I hear the announcer of the night game, of the baseball game is just terrific. I wonder who he is. Yeah. Okay. We've had an appointment that we've delayed till this week, and it has to do with one of my colleagues hasn't been able to talk with the person in question. And I understand there's an appointment to talk to that person for Monday.
Monday. He will be back in town. We could say in country, because he's been up in Maine. But he'll be back in town Monday, and I will be seeing him as soon as possible Monday morning.
Well, that means we would not make the vote until our next meeting, July 15th. I don't know that there's anything of an immediate nature until that happens, but I'll leave it. I am ready to vote tonight.
I am too, but out of deference to Ms. Lauder's request, and in fairness, if I was the one who wanted to have this conversation, I am willing to put this off, although having said that, the gentleman that I'm prepared to vote on is superbly qualified and has served this town with distinction for many, many years. But nonetheless, there's 3 of us here, so in the spirit of working together and in harmony, I just think it'd be better if we just wait.
Yeah. Can I ask just what's the question? Is that permissible, or is that?
No problem. I have the greatest respect for this person. My surprise was when I was told that you two had decided he would go on this committee. It is so different from anything he's ever done and his experience that I'm used to working with him on. And I really want to sit with him and find out why he would like to be on this and what his view of his contribution, and especially since we do have other people who are interested in the committee. But this took me by surprise with this particular committee.
That was last week. Right? That was the issue, and I talked to him on
Yes.
Friday. I
I've
had
been
no trouble reaching him Friday.
You can ask Ted. I have been trying to get him. Ted even tried to get him. And they've been in Maine, and apparently the cell phone service.
All right, well, for
If-
purposes of comedy, let's just wait.
I'll accept that motion. So I'll put it
I
on-
appreciate that.
I'll accept that with the understanding that the vote will occur on the 15th.
I have no problem with
Come
that
hell or high
whatsoever.
water. Yeah.
Okay, that's a hold. Okay, is there any other issues, the selectmen or town administrator reports, Mr. Town Administrator?
I've shared everything with you.
Okay, very good. Any colleagues, any reports or anything?
I don't think so.
Not at this time.
Not-
That's fine, okay. And a reminder again, July 6th, a big day, don't forget.
Won't be here.
Oh, no.
Skinny Atlas bound.
Are you Skinny Atlas bound? Okay. All right, well, I'll be here. Irma will be here.
Yes,
We don't miss that.
we'll cover for you.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Appreciate that.
Okay. And don't forget, July 4th is the parade. I'm sorry, the parade is July 4th at 10 a.m. And so be dressed in your festivities and be prepared. Hopefully it'll be the weather, I hope, Mark, rain or shine, we do it. And our fire chief will keep us apprised.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
That's it. He's worth everything we pay him on that. That's a
And
good-
we should say.
I like the weather reports, actually.
I've got to tell you, I got a lot of comments on your weather reports. Those are better than the Weather Channel.
I called the Weather Bureau today about Saturday night, and they just, no way, chief, no way.
Yeah.
We're not gonna commit that far out.
And we've got a great big regatta going between Hingham and Hull this weekend, so everybody pray. We should also say, since Duff is in the room, that the Grand Marshal of this year's parade is none other than Jerry Duff, who happens to know Mark Duff very well.
That's what I've heard.
I have to say something.
Let me just ask you, when would you not say something now?
This
Come
is for the
on.
record.
It's the boss you're talking about.
She asked me if I'd ride with her, and I said, no, this is about you, it's not about me. And I want you in that car either by yourself or one of your own friends, or perhaps a Girl Scout or something, so. And I would not ever want to miss the opportunity of marching with you people.
Oh, Duff,
Hoorah.
really? Just-
8 years in the row
Duff.
for it. Thank you.
I see an increase in budget coming.
Okay, so. That's right.
The Girl
Okay.
Scout house is leaking, I hear.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're very proud that she's been selected. That's a great recognition for her for many, many years of good work. And it was a good decision on your part to walk and not ride. Very good judgment. Okay. We have plans to adjourn to an executive session, not to return, for the purpose of discussing potential litigation and an update on some real estate issues that we're in discussion on. So I would entertain such a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Because to do so in public would
So in public would
damage our
damage
litigation position.
our litigation position. Okay, I have to poll you, Mr. Healy?
Sure, yes,
Ms.
please.
Slaughter?
Aye, yes.
Mr. Rebuffo, aye. We thank you all, we thank you. Okay, I need a ride home if anybody wants to come and pick me up before I sign off. We thank you all. Everybody have a happy and safe 4th of July.
See you at the parade.